I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the community that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. During public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those relating to a topic that's on the agenda for tonight. Members of the public are only to ask a specific question and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to the council considering the item. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor, are not defamatory, abusive, objectionable in language or substance, but rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect of the council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the direction of the Mayor. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note, all council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and to listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision-making and debate, and improving openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view a few days after the meeting on Council's website and YouTube channel. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of the members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question or makes a comment about an agenda item, they'll not be filmed. That's why your chair's way back there, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. Please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden. Okay, we'll go to the agenda now, councillors. Apologies, and we're all here, so there's no apologies. Item 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, we have the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 20th of September 2018, and they've been circulated. Are there any questions relating to these minutes? If not, can I have a mover for those? Councillor Baxter to move, Councillor Gross to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Item 3, which is the declarations of conflicts of interest. Councillors, do any councillors have a conflict in tonight's meeting? There are none. Item 4, petitions and joint letters. We have no petitions or joint letters. Sealing schedule, number 5, and we have no documents requiring sealing. Item 6, which is public question time. And we have 5 people that have requested to ask a question tonight. So, 6 actually. I'd like to ask Christina Kinst. Welcome, Ms Kinst. You just pop the microphone on, and if you could state your name and suburb, please.
Christina Kinst. I live in St Kilda. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. Thank you for this opportunity to ask some questions about the Sea Baths public rooftop access space. Sorry, a bit puffed, I was running late. It's now almost 3 months since a lockable gate was installed on both sets of stairs leading to the public access rooftop. A closed sign was attached to the gates. Now, last year, Community Action exposed the rooftop's 20-year history as public access space. So the current restrictions warrant, I believe, closer investigation and monitoring. The restriction on public access, the management claims is due to vandalism. So I'd like to ask some some questions about that. Could we see a list or a description or possibly some photos of this alleged vandalism or the extensive damage to tiles and turf that is being relied on to close the rooftop? And I'm wondering if the small line of broken tiles, perhaps 2 metres long, which I noticed on, I went up there on Monday and had another look, and this particular line of broken tiles appeared after the large marquee events of last summer, so it's been there for quite some time. I did not notice anything else that was different. My second question is, what type of remediation work is proposed? What is the time frame and what permits are required? Thirdly, do we have an end date for the rooftop closure? How long is Council prepared to allow the rooftop to be closed to public access? I have some questions about the installation of the gate. What permit, if any, was required or obtained to install the gates for the purpose of stopping public access? And will Council require that these gates are removed once the work, if any, is completed? And finally, some questions about the ongoing use of the roof. Will Council ensure that the rooftop is not used for private functions and other private activity, for example, gym training, and I do believe the gym uses it fairly regularly, while the rooftop remains closed to public access? In other words, if the public can't be there, should private users be allowed? And in what ways do local laws and planning guidelines support the use of the rooftop and stairs for private storage? While I was there on Monday evening, I took some photos, and I have copies here that I can leave of both the rooftop and one of the staircases being used to store furniture. And finally, what steps does Council intend to take to ensure that the rooftop is reopened promptly to public access, public use, and remains so unhindered? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Kinst. Ms Rosick, are you able to answer those questions?
I'll attempt to answer all those questions through you, Madam Mayor. First of all, DELP is the manager of that land and that site. In regards to the photographs that were requested and the alleged vandalism, I'll have to investigate. I'll take on notice and have a look at what I am able to share with the resident. In regards to our conversations with DELP, DELP has advised that yes, the rooftop is currently unavailable to the community because of the vandalism and graffiti, and they're currently planning to award the works to rectify that area within the next 2 weeks, and we anticipate, or they anticipate, that the works will be completed by the end of October, November. And the expectation is that that area will become available to the general public once again. So that answers the questions about the remediation works proposed and the time frame. So it should be available to the general public in November, ready for summer. That's what we've been advised by DELP. In regards to any permits being issued to install lockable gates, no planning permits have been issued. I understand the gates are there to prevent access and protect safety. If the gates were permanent, we could have a look at whether they do require planning permission. As I said, that area is expected to be available to the public. In regards to whether the gates will be removed, I'll have to take that one on notice. I don't have that information at that stage. In regards to having other events on the rooftop, DELP has advised that they permit pop-up events to occur on the rooftop, so they have provided that permission, and at other times it is obviously available to the general public. And I think I've answered all those questions.
Are the community excluded, I think was, while these other events are occurring, and I think that's probably part of that question as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll have to take that on notice. I'm not sure if the community can attend during those times. I'll have to check. The information I've given suggests not, but I will take that on notice and just double check. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Rosick. Ms Kate Richards, please. Welcome, Ms Richards. I think the microphone's already on. If you could just state your name again and your suburb, please.
Thank you. I'm Kate Richards. I'm from St Kilda. I attended the last council meeting, as you may remember. I understand that through annual leave I haven't had my questions answered yet, but I've been advised that I will hopefully have them by tomorrow. So I'm probably going to ask something similar tonight. Is in regards to outdoor events, and I'm speaking on behalf of Resident Action St Kilda Group. Considering Council believes that events bring a wealth of benefits to our community, including the health and well-being of residents, and considering the events held in Catani Gardens on the 22nd of September caused many problems for the community, problems such as major traffic issues with gridlock on our main roads and in the surrounding side streets, especially after the event and late into the evening, and seemingly with absolutely no assistance from council officers, traffic officers or police. We had intoxicated event goers seen urinating in the street and in people's gardens during the day and also after the event. One resident of Mary Street told me that she felt the need to lock her gate against intrusion, while others called police to intervene. I believe police were also called to intervene against drug use, people shooting up in the streets and in people's gardens in that area. We had intoxicated event goers vomiting in the streets, and that was apparent the day after walking around. Those similar intoxicated event goers congregating in many of the side streets after the event, causing noise and disruption to residents well after the event ended. At one stage, we counted 60 in the immediate vicinity outside our home in Ackland Street North. I've been advised it was much worse closer to the gardens themselves. Excessive noise from the event for residents closest to the gardens, as well as loss of amenity due to the gardens being closed and partially closed to residents and visitors for 10 days. So I'm asking how and why can Council condone, let alone permit this type of event to continually impact on residents in such a negative way? Also, considering Council believes that these events bring a wealth of benefits to a community, including economic development for local businesses, and considering that same event was in an enclosed area in the gardens with presumably food and drink provided within that enclosed area by outside caterers. It was aimed at a very young demographic who were unlikely to support many of the local businesses apart from maybe McDonald's and maybe Domino's Pizza, to name a couple. Considering also that Council placed electronic signage on Beaconsfield Parade for up to 2 weeks prior to the event, warning visitors to avoid the area, and along with the fact that many residents chose to leave the area for the day rather than having to cope with the fallout from the event and the impact on their ability to enjoy their weekend, so therefore not patronising our local businesses.
Please
so I
come
ask
to the
again,
end, Ms Richard.
Sure, I'm almost finished. So again, how can Council permit this type of event to continually impact on our businesses in such a negative way? And just quickly and finally, according to a recent conversation with one of our councillors, profit from outdoor events in the City of Port Phillip for the last summer program which spanned at least 6 months, was negligible. I could be wrong on this, but from memory it was around $6,000 for 6 months. So considering that council and also ratepayers are not gaining any benefit from this type of intrusive event, I ask, how can council permit this type of event to continually impact on our city in such a negative way? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Richards. I'd ask Mr Trail, please, to come forward. You may be able to answer many of those or take some on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of the listen out consent, just there was some commentary there regarding intoxication and the egress of patrons from that. There were some issues that we've experienced in part of the debrief that we're still looking into, specifically regarding intoxication. There's some improvements and a debrief with Victoria Police regarding that particular item, and we're still looking into that item. The other key item was access to Pier Road. Is some feedback that we've got that we want to sort of look at in regards to listen out. In regards to the statements regarding noise management, we do have, over the last summer, increased our noise management practices. We do have on our website clear guidelines on our notification. We have clear guidelines that we apply to event providers, and I'm happy to provide the link and that material through to the residents. Some of the highlights of the improvements we've made in that area for noise management is there's clear categorisation for events. So if it's a music event versus a triathlon versus a yoga concert, we have separate criteria and requirements. There's specific noise monitoring and reporting requirements. There was tests done during the night with our event advisors on site. All the test points were within regulations, and the full report is expected to us next week, where we can sort of look at that information. There's more requirements on information and noise management. One of the measures that we did have in place for Listen Out, who has been around for 3 or 4 years, was shipping containers designed, engineered, designed around the stages to help direct music out towards the bay and towards residents' amenity, and stronger reporting templates and notification processes. So we've made a lot of changes. We understand that events do bring many concerns, and we're trying to strike that balance between the activation of our traders, and traders have reported in previous years this event has been quite successful in attracting people coming to the venue. The demographic actually for this gets a wide range of youth, teenagers and sort of early 20s to 30s. In terms of notification, something we're looking to do and we'll ongoing have to manage this summer. We have got a question on notice from last week, and something we are organising, just waiting for some quotes to come back, is to actually get some offer noise management within the household to sort of find a bit more information about whether elevation does have an impact, because all the test sites we do are from land that we can access. So that's something we will offer to the rest community sort of through this process.
Mr Trail, Ms Richards mentioned that Catani Gardens is closed for 10 days. Are you able to speak to the length of time for a one-day event?
An event that sort of occupies this amount of people did close down for 7 to 9 days. It wasn't fully closed for that period, but there would have been closure practices to make sure the bump-in of stages and equipment was done safely, and that is a pre-requirement. The other question that was regarding events and profits, I'll need to take the exact notice, but we do permit over 400 events, and a lot of them are community events where we subsidise them through our time to organise them. We do need to have large-scale events to help subsidise those events. So to permit 400 events through the year, we do need to sort of have a major events calendar to help subsidise some of those elements. But we do make a profit. But the main driver of events is, as articulated in the strategy, is to increase economics, increase activation options and entertainment for our community, as well as supporting community events that are run.
Mr Trail, Ms Richards also mentioned that it was quite a young demographic, and possibly the only economic benefit was possibly McDonald's. I've also heard that Fitzroy Street in particular was very busy. Do we have any way of measuring the actual impact of the economic benefit for individual events, especially this large? I know we do it for the St Kilda Festival, but do we do something for Listen Out?
Through amendment, part of the post-evaluation report will get some economic assessment by the event provider. I do note that economic assessments change a fair bit, so in terms of a standardisation, but we do get some information as a bit of a guide.
And just addressing the health and wellbeing, the impact to the community when possibly a large number of people actually came from outside the community, so you might say that a lot of the community around there possibly didn't benefit from the Listen Out concept. How do we make sure that the health and wellbeing of our community, apart from noise, is not impacted? Is that something you need to think about, or...?
Through Madam Mayor, learning from all our events is something that we take quite seriously. We have extensive debriefs with all our stakeholders, traffic, Victoria Police, and all areas across council. So we're always looking to improve as events change and require sort of different improvements. So yes, that is something that we will take on board.
Thank you, Mr Trail. Mr Jeffrey Conahan, please. Welcome back again.
Is it on? Yep. Jeffrey Conahan, St Kilda. Like my neighbour Kate Richards, I was at the last council meeting and I'm waiting for a response too because people have been on leave. So, however, this is quite a different matter. It is around noise. It follows on from Kate Richards' point about some of the activities of patrons that turned up. I can assure you that the drugs started early on Saturday. My first phone call to police was about people shooting up in the Jackson Street car park at 10 a.m. in full view, and quite unconcerned by the fact I was standing there with a camera in my phone. Completely careless. Police nowhere to be seen. However, ironically, the event that I'm speaking about is just an example. Listen Out, what an ironically named event. It was quite hard to in fact get away from it. The event with amplified noise season has commenced, and there appears to be no change to local residents from last summer with any attempt to reduce noise and other negative impacts on residents. My question is, will Council undertake a review of the Open Space and Recreation Unit this calendar year, or as soon as possible, to assess its ability to select, manage and to monitor events against the City of Port Phillip outdoor event strategy? This review could include, but not be limited by, the credibility of noise management being undertaken by the event creating the noise, issuing permits for events that contradict wider council policy to protect resident amenity, the lack of coordination with other council units such as Assist, because when you phone them on the weekend, it just goes dead. So we're going to transfer you to the weekend out of hours number. So getting through to a local laws officer is almost impossible. And in fact, coordination with local laws, compliance teams, traffic management, post-event clean-up. And finally, would Council consider the appointment of a resident advocate within Council to oversee the activities of the Open Space and Recreation Unit, because it appears that everybody else's interests are being measured and assessed in relation to events and noise, except the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Conahan. I'll ask the CEO, Peter Smith, please, to address the first part of that question anyway. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'll just turn off my own beeper. Excuse me. Through you, Madam Mayor. No, there are no plans to review the capability of the events team that manage open space events in open space in the municipality. However, we are always looking for suggestions for continuous improvement. In fact, in the last week I spoke to a number of the managers involved in relation to feedback we've received, and I continue to receive after the Listen Out event, and in relation to feedback we've received in previous council meetings. And we will look at improvements that we can make, and where needed consult with the community in relation to those improvements. So we are taking on board feedback both from representations to these council meetings and from other residents and stakeholders in those events, and we'll continue to look at ways to improve. And in answer to question 2, part of that will be engaging with the community, so we will not be contemplating a community advocate within the open events team unless I see a stronger case for that and believe that our engagement otherwise is not working.
Thank you, Mr Conaghan. The councillors have heard you loud and clear. When we come up to reviewing our strategies, this will all be taken into in terms of the events that are coming forward in the next 12 years, it all gets taken into account. So thank you. Mr Peter Tapp, please. Welcome, Mr Tapp.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I am going to change what I was going to say, having heard what the last 2 residents said. I have come for the last 3 years to a number of council meetings, mainly about Listen Out and a few other events. I just live at the end of Fitzroy Street, and the last couple of years, or the last 3 years, we are really disturbed by the music. We're disturbed about a lot of things, but the music, even with all these containers that were there this year, every window rattles in our apartment and we can actually hear the thud, thud, thud. And it's for 10 hours. And it really nearly drives you mad. And every year I've got my own sound recording. I'll take my own recordings of the decibel readings, which I presented on the first year. I had readings of 80 and 90 decibels the first year. The first year was interesting because someone in the council allowed Listen Out to play, I think, 20 decibels above the EPA reading. That was very considerate of the residents, so whoever that was, thank you. Anyway, my main point I wanted to ask was, after coming for 3 years and seeing pretty well no change at all, also no one really got back to me about when I presented my decibel readings and the readouts. Mr Trail and Co were going to get back to me and I was going to get an answer. I never heard anything. So what I propose and what a number of residents would really like to do is we would ask the council to set up a working party where we can draw up a survey to ask all the residents who are affected by these loud events, private and public, around the foreshore and Catani Gardens, so we can have detailed responses to see whether there is community support or not for the people who are most affected. And we can bring in business. We just have to look how decimated Fitzroy Street is. No business beside food and drink is going to open in Fitzroy Street because the traffic is closed in summer. The streets are closed on the weekends because of events. So people can't get down into Fitzroy Street. Who in the world is going to open a dress shop, a bookshop, a delicatessen in Fitzroy Street when the busiest couple of days of the week, Saturday and Sunday, no one's going to come down because we've got Listen Out, Pleasure Garden, Oktoberfest.
Okay.
Anyway, the main point is we would like to set up a working party to draw up with council officers a survey to ask the people around the foreshore and the gardens whether there is support or not for these events? Because it was my understanding that the council you're
Thank you, Mr.
representing...
Tapp. That's been 3 minutes. We do ask the community this very regularly every year in terms of contributing to our event strategy and what events are coming on. So we do get feedback through there, but I will take that on notice and we'll get back to you about your request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam Alwyn, please. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors and employees.
Please state your name again and your suburb, please.
Miriam Alwyn from St Kilda East. On the 15th of November 2017, I spoke to the council about the domestic animal management plan, and the words I used were wasteful of council resources, breach of natural justice, not alignment with case law or equity, disregarding of civil procedure and other legislation which applies to every act that council administers. A council employee who is no longer with the council said that the council that their department was congruent with all those aspects of law, even though the documents which I provided, I know were very voluminous, but they showed that it wasn't. Recently, I have now got another letter from the animal management team. I have written 2 very polite replies requesting further information based on advice from senior counsel. I'm a barrister with 3 law degrees, but I'm a junior to a senior. And apparently, it's according to Australian law, I'm unable to properly reply to these allegations, which are very vague. There's no real allegations, just parts of the Act, as I've not been provided with anything in detail. Therefore, this denies me my ordinary rights and also natural justice. It's inequitable, and it actually, I'm not going to repeat my paragraph from earlier. And then today, I received a letter from a lawyer with regard to what I believe to be this matter, although they haven't put the number down. Each thing has a number on it, and I'll have to ask them that. And so this really harks back to wasteful of council resources. How is not complying with the basis of natural justice and all these other things I've just mentioned? It's just really...
So, Alwyn, I'm not understanding your question. So
The question is that how can a department, any department in question, get away with not really complying with the overarching aspects of the law? I mean, the Animal Management Department has an Animal Management Act, but that exists within the realm of a lot of other law and civil procedure and equity and natural justice. It's like a big collage that all law operates within. And I'm just wondering how they can just flaunt legal principles that are well established, and now on top of that send me letters from a lawyer saying they're entitled to flaunt legal principles. And
the short answer, Ms. Alwyn, is they're not entitled to flaunt.
Well, they are doing it again. This is not the first time, Madam Councillor. So this is not the first time. It's not the second time either. This is the third time I've had this issue.
Ms. Alwyn, I suggest that you write directly to the CEO, Peter Smith, and take that up directly with him.
I thank you very much for your advice.
And it's a little hard to understand without reading what you're talking about.
I know
to get to the bottom of it, but
it is, although in one aspect quite simple. There is a little bit of meat on the bone, so it's sort of, and I don't want to waste your time. I realise this is.
I've been following what you've been on about for a fair while, so I do understand that.
Peter Smith, CEO. And I will also, tomorrow, I will only write to the lawyers. I'm not going to write voluminous responses, which will cost the council a lot of money. I just wish to clarify, because they haven't given me whether it's this incident or not, and I really need to know whether it's exactly this or not. Does that make... That's it. So
Thank you very much, Ms. Alwyn. I appreciate that.
And I will be back. There are other issues in my area in which it appears to me the information given to the Mayor and the Council, which I acknowledge really, you all really do your best to really run a tight and fantastic ship, may not have been very supportive of good decisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms Orwin.
See you next meeting.
Okay. Mr Bill Phelan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillors.
Welcome, Mr Phelan.
Bill Phelan from Port Melbourne. I want to raise again the question of the closure of the Graham Street slip lane into Albert Street and the broader lessons which can be drawn from it. I raise it not because anything can be done now.
Mr Phelan, can you put the microphone a little closer to your mouth? Some of the councillors can't hear you.
I raise it not because anything can be done now about the project which is proceeding, but because I believe the way the project was developed and implemented and the reactions to community concerns about it have significant implications for how Council develops policy and its relationship with staff and the community. My first point is that this project was never evidence-based and was simply a self-admitted good idea by one of Council's engineers, Ted Teo, who is no longer with the Council. My second point is that despite evidence about whether the project would be effective or cost-effective, it became something which was relentlessly defended by staff and councillors, irrespective of any evidence provided to it, particularly an independent analysis from one of Australia's leading traffic engineers, Andrew O'Brien. My third point is that the independent analysis suggested an alternative which would have saved ratepayers $70,000 to $80,000 at a time when ratepayers are in uproar about the huge increases in their rates following the revaluation and 2.5% rate increase. I note here that Councillor Pearl was the only councillor who came to examine the project proposal on site, and along with Councillor Bond, opposed the rate increase. My fourth point is the need to critically evaluate the project's operational impact so that its cost effectiveness can be measured and, more importantly, its impact on traffic movements in the area. For instance, what monitoring will be undertaken to establish whether it will increase traffic in Clark Street, which is the primary school street, or any other positive or negative effects on pedestrian or vehicular traffic. I have no intention of going back over my various attempts to point different viewpoints to staff councillors and parliamentarians. However, my experience of those interactions leads to my fifth and final point. When confronted by expert, independent evidence, the council and staff reaction was overwhelmingly not to engage with alternative views, but to resist them. The conclusion that can reasonably be drawn from that is that there is a cultural problem, commonly known as the not invented here culture, which is deeply embedded in the city of Port Phillip. This can only limit innovation and, worse, make community consultation tokenistic rather than a process of constructive co-creation of policies. And I suppose my question, Madam Mayor, is how will Council change this cultural problem?
Thank you, Mr Phelan. I'll ask Ms Rosick to address those two questions, but I will say, as you were told at the last council meeting, that councillors did ask the organisation to review the independent or the advice that you'd given them, and Ms Rosick provided that response last week. So I will say that's incorrect.
Madam Mayor, if I can elaborate, whilst that may have been the case, the question was only ever put to the Chief Traffic Engineer, who you knew right from the start would never agree to anything that did not come out of his office.
Ms Rosick?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I did provide a response to Mr Phelan's question at the last council meeting. I don't have all the details with me. works that are occurring were endorsed by Council and were carefully considered by Council's traffic engineers. As I advised Mr Phelan in person and through the Council meeting, we did seriously consider the alternative proposal, and the cost-benefit analysis, primarily the protection of the children and large number of families who access at Port Melbourne Primary School, were seriously considered, and also the design guidelines and the traffic considerations for that intersection. And the decision was made to proceed with Council's resolution and not alter the design and come back to Council.
Thank you, Ms Rosick. So we'll take the other questions on notice. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers? Councillor Crawford.
I was wondering if we could ask the officers to clarify the misinformation that's going out to the community about the increase in rates. I think there's a real misunderstanding of that the rates, how the rates are applied. If we could maybe get someone to kind of elaborate on how it's proportional to the value of your property, and that if we hadn't accepted the cap rate, or the rate cap, and taken it, that it would have led to a huge gap in our ability to fund things over 10 years, and we would have been long-term disadvantaging future councils.
Mr Carroll.
So, point of order, Madam Mayor, can I just ask that there be no further interjections by councillors while the officers answer that question?
Thank you. Some respect would be good. Thank you, councillors. That's not on.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Rates are set through the state government mandated process for raising property taxes in Victoria. It's based on a system of distribution of the burden based on evaluation of a person's property, and there's several different mechanisms that are available to councils. We've chosen the net annual value approach, but all of them involve the rates being distributed based on a person's value of their property as opposed to income, which might be the way you traditionally see it with with federal government taxes. With that in mind, every second year, historically, there's a valuation process that goes on by our qualified valuers, and that's actually then assessed by the State Government Valuer General to make sure that everything that has been, the valuation process has been robust. And that essentially will change the value of properties relative to each other in the overall makeup of the city, and then affects the way that rates are distributed. So when council sets the overall rates that it requires, it does so in the context of state government rates capping framework, which is basically on average a 2.25% increase in rates across the municipality. The council has complied with the 2.25% rates cap in working out what rates we need to fund all the services and investment that we make across the city for the year. However, because of the way that the property valuation system works, some properties will get a significantly higher or lower increase in their rates than the 2.25%. So, sorry, I'm doing some of this off the top of my head here. I'm trying to pull up something. So, for instance, in Port Melbourne, there was an average shift in the property valuation of around 30.9% over that 2-year period, which led to a rates change increase of around 16% based on the including the 2.25% change overall. If we had had a 0% rates increase overall, that 16% increase would have reduced to 13.4% as an increase, because the value of that property had increased substantially, so its share of the pie also increased, irrespective of any rates increase. Council does what it can to minimise the rates increases while making sure that we achieve our financial sustainability targets in our long-term financial plan and fund the services and investment commitments that the council's made over the next 10 years in the council plan. If we reduce the rates increase, if we were to move it from 2.25% to 0%, off the top of my head, that would be $2.5 million maybe, of rates funded expenditure or non-targeted income that we would have to raise to offset that. And for that to not have an impact ongoing permanently, we would have to make sure that those savings or revenue increases in other sources were made permanently. Otherwise, it would lead to a gap that would need to be addressed in following years.
Can I just clarify, though, that even if we had not taken a rates rise of the 2.25%, people's rates, depending on the value of their property, they would still have received a rate increase because the value of their property increased. Am I correct?
That's generally correct. So under the framework, we had about 70% of properties had a rates increase of 2.25% or less, and some others had significantly more than that. Some people's rates increases went down based on the way that we distribute the rates, but again, I'll highlight the Port Melbourne or Garden City, for example. Under Garden City, under the 2.25% rate increase, it was 15.1% overall because the value of their property went up by 29.9%. If we had a 0% rate increase, their rates would have still gone up by 12.6%.
Thank you, Mr Carroll. Councillor Bond.
If we increased our rates income by 0 and we cut, instead of increasing it by $2.5 million, and we cut spending by $2.5 million, what would be the rate gap?
Through you, Madam Mayor, can I just have that question again?
If we didn't increase our rates by 2.5%, which would take roughly $2.7 million from our income, and then we cut spending by $2.7 million, what would be the net effect on our budget?
So through you, Madam Mayor, if you cut expenditure by the same amount, as long as that expenditure is rates funded expenditure, there would be no impact on that 1 year. You need to make sure that that expenditure cut is actually permanent and ongoing to make sure there's no cumulative impact or gap that grows over time.
And the proposal put forward by Councillor Pearl and I to go with a 0 rate rise budget, that came with a list of suggested spending cuts, did it not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I did not see, there was no formal list that was submitted to officers to review. I did see some items that Councillor Bond shared with me. I didn't go through them in detail to know whether they were permanent or not.
But just to confirm, we didn't put forward a 0 rate rise budget without corresponding cuts. We had a list of things that we felt were unnecessary spending.
Councillor Bond, nothing was put forward to the council at all.
No, that's because you didn't allow me to, Madam Mayor. I was quite willing to table the document in the meeting and you wouldn't permit me to do so.
Nothing was put forward to the council.
Because you...
Does anyone else have any question? Does anyone else have any question first? Councillor Bond.
So if Councillor Simi could stop interrupting as per Councillor Baxter's instructions. If there was a rates gap of, say, $2.7 million over 10 years, and our total budget over 10 years is about 2.2 billion, wouldn't that equal a rates gap of 0.013%?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think, Councillor Bond, you're working on total income there, a total cumulative income. So, yeah, so essentially, I haven't got a calculator in front of me to work that out. That's okay. But what I can say is that the council already commits to, to efficiency savings targets of around 2%, 1.5 to 2% of its expenditure each year, excluding depreciation expense. We've achieved around 9 million of efficiency savings in the past 4 budgets. That's not done easily. But it is possible for the council, if it chooses, to make some decisions about permanent expenditure reductions. Most likely they would have some service level impacts, but it's up to the councils to prioritise that through their processes, budget processes.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Are there any more questions, councillors? If not, I have another question. Councillor Crawford.
Got a little list here tonight. I guess the other question I wanted to ask was whether we had, in response to the community, since our last year's open or the big events that we held, we have reduced them. I was hoping that someone could respond that we have actually reduced some of the big events we're holding in Botanic Gardens, or if someone could clarify that for me, please.
Mr. Trail.
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of event days, we've had reduced days over the last 2 years. I need to take on notice exactly how many event days, but we have. There has been an increase in music events by 1, but total events have reduced at Botanic Gardens. We have capped that as an area where we're trying to not program any more events than we've currently got provided there.
I've also got a question. It might be to Ms McGorry, maybe Ms Bennett's, around our reporting for the boards that councillors potentially sit on or not sit on. For example, I resigned my position a little while ago from Casper Care as an example because it was adequate that a report would fulfil the obligations in terms of making sure there was adequate Port Phillip beds and low-cost beds, for example. I was just wondering when and how do councillors see these reports? Are you able to address that, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, one of the parts of the review of Council's advisory committee's piece of work that we're doing, that it will come back to you in December of this year. Part of that will capture reports back from both those advisory committees but also external bodies so that we can make sure that there is often and clear reporting on those matters. With respect to your comments on Casper Care, we've certainly noted that and we'll come back to you specifically on that particular board appointment.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 8.1, which is the CEO report. Councillors, we've got one member of the public that's requested to speak. I'd like to ask Ms Helen Halliday, please, to come forward. Welcome, Ms Halliday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Helen Halliday. I live in Albion Street, Balaclava. I'm asking some questions in relation to the CEO's report. And first of all, I wanted to advise the council, as a matter of background, that about a year ago now, the council put forward a memorandum of understanding in relation to the Ulster Creek catchment area, and that I thought was a very well worded piece of council policy, which related primarily to making sure that Elwood was treated with the concern that was needed in relation to flooding, and the second aspect of it was that there would be a catchment-based approach to looking at the ways in which water could be retained and used within the catchment. And much to my surprise, I was looking, the council is also, its primary responsibility is to provide for the Elster Creek Integrated Water Management Project to provide engagement advice, which it does very well, I think, through the website. However, today I was seeking some information about what the various reports that were enumerated on the website to find out what access there was, and discovered that to date, and maybe this can be clarified by the officers, the reports that are enumerated are not actually publicly available. That was not my, it's obviously a matter of concern, so I'll come back to that in a minute, but the more important thing was that the principles that are part of the work that was described in the action plan have now been relayed to the reference committee, and for them to respond to some 12 months, I think, after the whole process started. And one of the principles related to water retention, and the principle that was proposed, which was principle 4, was that open space would not be used for water retention. And in fact, what was the principle proposed was that flood mitigation studies consider alternative flood storage options, for instance, road and transport corridors, in preference to parkland and recreation space. Now, that is in direct contradiction to the Memorandum of Understanding. And similarly, in relation to the Principle 2, which was addressing flooding, the proposal that was put to the reference committee was that nuisance flooding is more relevant and more achievable than reducing the 1 in 100-year flood event. So the principle that's proposed is that flood mitigation opportunities are sought across a range of small to medium-sized events and geographic scale. In other words, flooding events which have got nothing to do with the flood impact on Elwood of Elster Creek catchment. And from those things, it seems to me that one of the major issues of concern is that integrated water management, the council now has no clear policy in relation to integrated water management, and that often there is a lack of openness in dealing with water management, which persisted over a number of years because many of the reports which should be available to the public have deemed to be unable to be released because other agencies are involved. And I refer there to the comment in the CEO's report relating to Albert Park Lake. So primarily, I guess my questions are, in relation to Elster Creek, how will the proposed principles, which fundamentally change the meaning of the memorandum, be restated to express the clear intent of the council and its community in relation to Elster Creek and its impacts? That's question one.
Please come to the end, Ms Halliday. That's well and truly.
Question 2, Albert Park Lake. What background reports are available on Albert Park Lake, and is it consistent? Is the proposed peer review and its outcomes consistent with best practice? And point 3, given that the council doesn't have an integrated water management update of its 2007 water management plan, would it not be timely now to invite Tony Wong to review the work and provide analysis of best practice which is consistent across the whole of the municipality?
Thank you, Ms Halliday. Ms Patton, if you would. Did you get all those questions? Yes. Okay. I'm not sure if that microphone's going to work, but give it a go. Takes a couple of goes.
Through you, Madam Mayor. In relation to the first question, to do with the Elster Creek Action Plan and the flood mitigation principles that Mrs. Halliday were referring to, the question, I understand it, is whether the flood mitigation principles actually contradict the previously agreed principles for the Elster Creek partnerships that we have across many levels in council. The first one in relation to open space being used for flood mitigation. The principle as described does not preclude using open space, merely suggests that we should consider other options first where possible because of the limited open space available in such built-up areas and the way that that open space is, of course, valued by our community. So if other options are considered and not found to be appropriate, open space is still in the mix. The second potential contradiction that Mrs. Halliday raised was to do with 1 in 100 storm events as opposed to small and medium flood mitigation opportunities. Melbourne Water has recently changed its focus to include small and medium flooding as something that should be mitigated against, whereas previously they were focused on those larger storm events. We're actually quite pleased that those smaller events are now being considered within the Elster Creek Catchment Action Plan. The smaller, medium events are in fact the ones that are affecting our community more frequently. In relation to Mrs. Halliday's further questions about communicating with the community, the Elster Creek 2018 Elster Creek Catchment Action Plan is available on the website with which is updated every 2 weeks with the progress towards those actions. Some of those documents aren't necessarily available on that website, and it does come to the fact that these documents are produced as a collaboration between the City of Port Phillip and other councils, and it's not up to the City of Port Phillip to unilaterally release documents. However, the good news is that there is a report being presented to Council in November, which includes attachments of many of the documents that Mrs. Halliday is interested in seeing. So we'll be coming back to Council on, I believe, the 7th of November with that information. And in relation to her question about the Integrated Water Management Plan and whether that needed to be updated urgently, Mrs. Halliday referred to a 2007 plan which was actually updated in 2010 and is one of the first actions to be delivered under the newly endorsed Sustainable Environment Strategy to create a new water plan that reflects our current understanding of the municipality. I'll now pass over to my colleague.
Through you, Madam Mayor, with regards to the questions regarding the Albert Park Stormwater Harvesting Project, as you'll be aware, the project is a joint undertaking between Parks Victoria and the City of Melbourne. So likewise, the City of Port Phillip isn't in a position to unilaterally release that information related to the project, but Council is committed to transparency in how we deliver projects. As an example, with the Elmer Park Stormwater Harvesting Project, we're currently exploring opportunities to make the detailed design information available to the community. We can commit to raise the issues with the project partners and see what information can be released at an appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Halliday. Okay, that's the end of our questions from the public on the CEO report. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers on the CEO report? I have a couple, I have a few actually. I'd like to thank you, Ms. Bennett. Just if you can do an update on the recordable injury rate that's dropped. In particular, it's failed to meet target, and it talks about that it hasn't met target due to data cleansing. Are you able to sort of elaborate on why that data's been cleansed and what's been cleansed?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So I think the reference to data cleansing was in an earlier draft of the report and was removed in the final version. However, we have been doing data cleansing. So when we say data cleansing, we have been working very hard with our staff and also the provider of injury management and reporting system. So we're being much clearer around the recording of trips, hazards, injuries and the like. So there certainly has been data cleansing, but not as it relates to the long-term injury lost time injury number within the report. With respect to the lost time injury report, it has reduced compared to some of the previous months in 2017. It is certainly something that we're focusing quite hard on. For the month of August, we certainly had a lower incidence of recordable injuries, and we're working hard through our managers to help those who are workers that may have an injury come back to work in whatever capacity that they're able in a really quick and efficient time. We're monitoring those figures closely.
On page 31, it talks about councillor attendance, and earlier in the report, it does talk about it being off track, but it's actually recorded as okay, as green. Should that be a yellow off track?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, absolutely it should. So we will certainly make sure that we clarify that for the public record. So it certainly was lower than the target and should be reported as such, and we apologise for that.
This might be for Mr Trail, but I've got two questions, one about JL Murphy Reserve and one about North Port Oval. JL Murphy Reserve talks for the pavilion being issues between the building code compliance and the technical drawings. It's a bit disappointing. Has this been resolved? And the other question about North Port Oval being a planning permit delay, is this going to affect our overall timelines?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll take the question on JL Murphy. Yes, the building permit issues have been resolved. They were relatively minor, though the project is likely to be back on track soon. We've received the SRV funding application this week from the state government. We anticipate reviewing that document and having it entered into within the next week. With the building permit issues now resolved, we anticipate being out to tender to the selected shortlisted tenderers by the end of next week and are on track for a contract award in late November.
Thank you, Mr Johnson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there was just some minor items to acquire the planning permit, just with some heritage element clarifications that we now have a planning permit and works are available to commence. There is a 2-week delay to the start, but we still will finish that prior to Christmas, allowing the grass to grow in prior to the football season.
Thank you, Mr Trail. I'd also like to ask a question about Port Phillip Zero. Ms McGorry. So this talks about, in the CEO report, about reducing issues of homelessness. It outlines that there's a new position. Can we please have an update on that? I wasn't quite aware of what's going on there.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. As part of the Council's Homeless Action Strategy and Strategic Direction 1, a budget bid, so the CEO's breakfasts were held with local community housing organisations, which led to an agreement to put forward a budget bid into the process around functional zero approaches to homelessness, so a housing first model with collaborative impact across the community, housing associations, business and philanthropic sector, which has been evidence-based in Brisbane, Adelaide and some other places to impact on homelessness. The budget bid was put into the process, councillors supported the budget bid, and so the allocation was made. That person has now been appointed and begins shortly, in a week or two, when she returns from leave.
Thank you. And one further question from me about Fisherman's Bend parking controls. Just wondering if there's any update in terms of how that's been rolled out. So it does update it in the report, but I'm just wondering if there's been any feedback.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the project planning for implementation of the parking controls is well underway, and it is anticipated that works will commence in November with completion in December, and the parking controls implemented. There'll be signage and the advice provided to the community when they are implemented. So in December this year.
Thanks, Ms Rosick. Councillor Simic.
I've got a couple of questions as well, Madam Mayor. My first question relates to the update on page 6 regarding Fisherman's Bend, and a question whether the organisation has received any indication from the state government as to when the Fisherman's Bend framework, the final version and the funding and finance plan will be made available.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are awaiting announcements on the framework, and we understand that's gone to the Minister. We're not clear when that's going to come out. We hope that's announced shortly. In terms of the funding and finance framework, we understand that will probably be going to determine the next government and be around about the budget next year.
And just one of the indicators which I'm concerned about on page 24, community satisfaction with council performance greater than 65. We're currently at 63, so I'm just wondering if officers can set out what steps organisations taking to rectify that statistic.
Thanks, Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, so since the Community Perception Survey was undertaken earlier this year, officers have focused on a range of the indicators. We've read through, or staff have read through, much of the verbatim that is associated with those comments. And we've certainly fed that through to each of the relevant areas to help them start to have a look at how they might change or improve their service in response to that. It is a perception survey, and sometimes we can't always explain why things have gone up or down, but certainly those where there are large variations, we have taken a close look at the verbatim. Officers are using that as part of their service planning and responses. And for some of those where there was a particular drop, I think there was one which dropped quite significantly. We did go back to the provider and ask them for their insights on why that drop may have occurred, and as the experts or market research experts, and they were also not able to explain to us why that variance may have occurred. Certainly where there are questions that are able to be benchmarked across other councils, that's certainly an area that we look at as well. But not all of the questions that the City of Port Phillip asks are able to be benchmarked, because some of them are specifically tailored for here. But we certainly do take it seriously, and it's part of our ongoing service improvement efforts.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I ask, what's the frequency of the community satisfaction survey?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so the survey is undertaken annually, and it's usually undertaken in February, March.
And just as a follow-up question, so does that mean that all of these indicators will remain off track until we get a better survey next year?
Through you, Madam Mayor, these are the results that we have at the moment, and when the surveys are next undertaken and the results are released, then yes, those figures would be updated.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Councillor Gross, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll move now to 12.1. which is the interim built form controls, the design and development overlay 27 for St Kilda Road South. And we have one speaker. Can I please ask Ms Kay O'Connor, please? Welcome.
Thank you, councillors. Well, JAG has... I'm Kay O'Connor. I live in Wellington Street, St Kilda. I represent JAG. JAG supports the recommendation that will come before council this evening that we've read in their report, and requesting the Minister for Planning to extend the expiry date for the interim scheduled 27 DDO beyond December 2018 for another year. To date, St Kilda Road South Urban Design Framework has taken 6 years, and in fact for JAG 11 years when JAG first raised it with council. So it is a long time coming, and yes, we would very welcome those interim controls, because without them we have none. Although in September last year council submitted Amendment C122 to the DELWP for approval, we are aware there have been changes which recently include the DELWP requiring a change to the form and content of planning schemes, which recently has attributed to the delay in the passage of C122. The question I ask is the final form of Amendment C122 with the DELWP, that is, has council completed its requirements requested by the DELWP now? And I know it's not council's delay, and we do appreciate the council officers and all the work they've done over many years, particularly Katrina Turgeon, who's been with it for a very long time, and recently Ms Dodd, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms O'Connor. So one of the councillors may take that up as part, this is part of the process, but thank you.
Thank you.
So councillors, Councillor Simic, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I take up the last speaker's question, please?
Mr Dewar and Ms Rosick, are you able to answer Ms O'Connor's question about have we fulfilled all the obligations under the requirements for this amendment?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. I'm confident that all of the necessary documentation is submitted to the department, and that the Minister has asked for that to be expedited so that he can consider the approval before caretaker.
Okay, so it's been expedited and it's all with him now?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, all of the documentation isn't with the Minister at the moment. Thanks to your recent correspondence, the Minister for Planning has requested that his department provide him with a briefing and the necessary documentation for him to consider the approval of both C122 and C154 before the caretaker period kicks in. But that is still not a promise that he will approve both of those things before caretaker, but we do understand that the process is in train for him to consider them.
Thank you. Councillor Bond?
Just regarding the timing, how long ago did we submit the revised documentation to the Minister? Do you have a date of when that was returned to him?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have the actual date. However, Council endorsed a final position on the 19th of September 2017 for St Kilda Road South and the 28th of March 2018 for St Kilda Road North, and normal practice is to submit the relevant information straight after that. As was indicated, there was some revisions required because of the changes to the planning requirements by DELP. But yes, but I'll give you that date.
Thank you. Yeah. And Mr Dewar, I believe you want to add to that?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. The ministerial direction, I think, which Ms Rosick is alluding to, came out in May 2017, and that did require some reformatting of C122, and there was more than one round of some changes requested by the department in relation to that. And the most recent of those was completed a couple of weeks ago, but they do have all of the necessary and correctly formatted documentation that they require.
And further to Mr Dwyer, sorry, I found the date for the amendment C122, and it was submitted to the Minister on the 19th of October 2017 originally.
Thank you, Ms Rosick. Okay, any other questions, councillors? Councillors, we do have an alternative recommendation from the officers, and if I could just pop that up on screen, and I'd like to ask a question, please, of Ms Rosick to clarify why we would remove section 20 part A and broaden this up. If you could please explain the reason for the deletion.
We've been advised from the department that that may not be the legislation or the clause that will be considered as part of the approval of the amendment, consideration and approval of the amendment process. Mr Dwyer may wish to add to that.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, Ms Rosick is correct. We have previously submitted extensions to the department under section 20 part A. We've been advised at this time, though, that they may consider that 20 part 4 is a more appropriate version for us to make the application under, and whilst we were waiting for confirmation from them, we thought it best to remove that specific reference of the Act from the recommendation to give us greater flexibility to respond to the department when they make that decision for us.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions on the changes before I ask for a mover on this? No. So we have an alternative recommendation. Councillor Bond would like to move that, and I'll have Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
As was mentioned earlier by Ms O'Connor, this has been 6 years, and hopefully this will be the last time this amendment C122 is mentioned in these chambers during a council meeting. I hope that's the case, but certainly not sure it will be. Let's just hope the government gets on and approves this prior to going into caretaker mode, and it doesn't drag on into the new term of the new government.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Brand.
Nothing much more to add, except to say to thank Ms O'Connor for turning up and asking the question and making her observations and her kind words to various council members and to council, and just to acknowledge the incredible input that she and her organisation have put into this, including, and also I need to acknowledge, well, there's a huge community input into it, including the Community Alliance of Port Phillip. But I've got to say, Ms O'Connor and Jag have been at it right from the start. Very impressive.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I will also thank Ms O'Connor for coming in and thank the JAG group generally. Your contribution to our reports and our council meetings in particular on St Kilda Road South is very, very welcome. It is very important that we achieve this interim planning scheme. It would be a huge concern if it wasn't extended. The implications for the community would be quite dire, and so we absolutely need this interim amendment to go through. So good luck with everyone that's having those conversations, and let's hope there's fast passage and that we're not faced with a gap that will allow all sorts of things to come through that none of us want. So, Councillor Bond, would you like to close? No, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we'll move to 13.1, which is the Art and Soul Advisory Panel appointments. And we don't have anyone that's requested to speak from the community. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford.
By appointing these panel members, I just wanted to clarify, because we've got so many knowledgeable and talented people in all different areas, from design to gaming to, theatre, if it doesn't preclude us sort of inviting people to come and give advice or comment on various projects, depending on what it is.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the terms of reference does allow for co-opting members. There's quite a large scope for this advisory panel to look at, so I think there's plenty of room for extra expert advice to be brought in.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms Strano, I just wanted to ask, so we've got a list of people that has been recommended to us that's not part of the public report. And just wanted to, if you can quickly outline how that process has occurred and how those people have been, what criteria, if you could elaborate on that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The process was a combination of people nominating and people being suggested for this role. The criteria is outlined within the terms of reference. So it was about people's ability to think very broadly across the community rather than just about self-interest. It was looking at a diversity of representation across a number of different creative fields. Also, we had an eye on other members of the community who might not be so embedded within the kind of creative professionals but are engaged as volunteers or participants in other ways as well. So the broad mix of skills was very important, and a demonstrated commitment to a participative and participatory and consultative process.
Thank you. Also, councillors, if I'm not aware of any, but if there is any issue with the panel appointments, I'm happy to go in and take this off into confidential later on, should that be something you want to further discuss. There is an easy option. We're going into confidential after this anyway, so we can discuss it further there, or not. Just putting it out there, that is a very easy option to take, because obviously we can't discuss people in this forum. So just putting it out there. So since there's no more questions, we have an officer's recommendation. So I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder on that, and then you'll need to put in the names. So Councillor Crawford to move and Councillor Gross to second.
I just had a question.
So Councillor Crawford needs to put in the names.
Right.
Can you please list them?
Okay, so the names I'd like to include as appointments to the Art and Soul Advisory Panel are Francesca Valdenocci.
Oh, we might need some. No, she doesn't.
Oh, you haven't got them there. Yes, misspelling. I can spell it out if you like. Kay Blum, Malcolm Blaylock, Maxine Wren, Siobhan Connors, Tess Hamilton, Vivian Corcoran, Peter Bain-Hogg, Stan Yaramuna, apologies if I haven't got that correct, and Tim Barnett. And is that the list complete? I think that is right.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford, and Councillor Gross, you have seconded that. So while they're being added in, Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just to say, given the wealth of experience that exists in our community and council desire to be as consultative and inclusive of our community in everything we do. I think this is actually a great step. So we've got different eyes, different perspectives, different advice that will come to us on some of the big things that, as we say, art's at the heart. So, and I'm very happy that we can co-opt in people at appropriate times, given appropriate projects and things we are considering.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Gross, no. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Wow. Councillor Copsey, if your voice
My
can
voice,
make it.
it'll make it. I just wanted to thank everybody who has applied. I know, I'm a base tonight. Thank everyone who applied through the process and the people who will be giving their time on the Consultative Committee. It's a fantastic service to your community, and I'm really looking forward to having that community input.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford, would you like to close? No, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Palais Theatre, the presentation of the annual report. And I believe I have Neil Cox here. Welcome, Neil. Mr. Cox, I should say. And congratulations on your appointment to be the General Manager of the Palais Theatre. They both work, actually. They're just temperamental, yes.
Thank you for welcoming me to your city. I've come from Christchurch in New Zealand, where the challenges over the last 10 years have been massive, as you can understand, and we rebuilt a theatre pretty much from facade to back of house, reconstructed it, did everything that was necessary on the heritage basis, and then rebuilt a business out of that, which was going swimmingly when I left, so it's good. It was called the Isaac Theatre Royal. So when I was made aware of the Palais Theatre and that the GM role had come up there, it was a bit of a no-brainer for me, because I looked at what was on, what it did for the community, what Live Nation's plans were, and I thought after 10 years in Christchurch it was worth a bit of a challenge. So, Madam Mayor, thank you for inviting me, and councillors, hello. What has been nice, and also excuse me if my legs are just under the desk, and that's just the way it goes. I've been here for 2.5 weeks, but it's been really fascinating to see how, and to be part of two very, very important new initiatives that Live Nation have put in there, which was the community grants, which were the first bunch were announced last week, and also that the initiative that the theatre has, that 50 cents from every single ticket goes back into the community, is a fabulous thing. And trust me, there are other initiatives coming as well. But Live Nation pretty much set the first budget on saying that 100 events should go through in the first calendar financial year, which ends in December. We'll put through probably about 105 this year, which I think is not too bad. I'll be party to the budgets for next year, next week. But I think the whole key is that pretty much they're generating as many events as they can, but not trying to be too stupid about that. So it's I think next year's budget is 110, year after that is 120. Off the record, I'd like to probably do 150, but that's just the way it goes. But the key thing is on the events that we put through, we're averaging around about 2,200 people, which is fantastic. And from every report back that we seem to be getting from the community so far that I have seen, it seems to be extremely welcome. So it's a challenging role, and I have no disrespect for anything involved in that. I know that there's going to be a massive amount of community input into what the Palais does. Live Nation are supportive. There is committed funds going forward, and we know that there are things still to do at the theatre, which I'd love would have been done initially, but they just, first visit to the toilets is something to do. But we believe, working with, the City of Port Phillip, that the collaboration is going to be something quite fantastic. So, mostly it's as I say, there's a lot in the annual report. I can talk through it if you want, but mostly I would probably prefer to do that in a few more weeks' time or a couple more months' time. but it's a joy. It's an absolute joy. I think the theatre is, when it's alight at night, it looks quite spectacular, and the location of where everything is, I think the investment and what the City of Port Phillip have done, and that commitment with Live Nation has been something quite special, and there are more special things to come. Looking at next year's calendar, to have pretty much seven sold out Tim Minchin shows is something that is incredible, and my role is really to work with, in the same way as I did 10 years ago, to not only make sure the theatre's in great shape, but also to make sure that the gaps are plugged. We're not over-committing the place, we're not over-committing the community, that the community can get in, that the Victorian arts can get in, national touring can get in, and international touring can get in. So it's a bit of a calendar juggle, but it's looking quite good at the moment. So really, if anyone's got any questions, I think that's probably the best way to go. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr Cox. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr Cox or even Mr Carroll, if that's the case? No? We've all had a bit of a tour recently, and so all of our unanswered questions or our curiosities have all been satisfied during that tour. So thank you very much, for your team in facilitating that tour. It's always very interesting to see how much repair has been undergone. So a lot more to come. So yeah, we're very excited about that. Thank you very much. Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation there. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just to say, I think in the last term of council, this is probably one of, or the biggest decision we had to make in that entire 4 years. And at the time, it turned out to be one of probably the easiest decisions we had to make in the end, even though it was probably the biggest. And it's great to see that. I think we're about 2 years, it'll almost be 2 years to the day for making that decision, a bit over 2 years, that everything that was, that they said they would do back then, they appear to be doing in terms of show numbers. They're up roughly where they were, or where their proposal was. The community fund is working well. Community access is working well. All the booking agents who said they would never use a Palais if we went with Live Nation are now all using it. So none of the downside that was the sky that was meant to fall in if we gave the lease to One Nation has eventuated, or whatever, Live Nation. Live Nation. Has eventuated. So slip of the tongue there. It's too much politics in my life at the moment. Congratulations on a great effort to date, and we certainly look forward to, I think, whatever's left in the lease, another 30-something years, 33 years, I think, roughly it is, and look forward to Palais playing its part in rejuvenating, that bit of St Kilda as more and more concerts come on and more people turn up, and your average attendances. It's great driving back down there again and just seeing all those car parks full and the Upper Esplanade full. We missed it for a couple of years, but it's great to have it back.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Brand? Oh, Baxter. There's a B. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I guess I will echo some of Councillor Bond's points, perhaps not the One Nation one, but certainly what has been promised is being delivered by all accounts, and that's really promising. It's been really exciting to see the rebirth of the Palais from the condition that it was in to where it has come now. And obviously, I wasn't a part of the last council that had to struggle through the decision, as Councillor Bond was saying, but I'm here in a position to be able to see the amazing things that have happened since, and it's been fantastic. And going on that tour recently, I've had a couple of tours there, but going on the recent tour was a great way to see. Really, so much has been done, and it truly has been amazing. And it is a wonderful place to see certain types of gigs. It's not. It's a very versatile venue, but it can't run every single type of gig in the world. But you go there and you know exactly what you're going to get, which is very high quality atmosphere and usually a high quality performance. So I'm very pleased to move to second to this motion to accept the report.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Bond, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to 14.2, which is the outcomes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting for the 23rd of August 2018 and the presentation of the annual report 2017-18. And we'll welcome Ms Helen Lanyon, the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. I believe you've got a little bit of a report to make.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Well,
I'm very pleased to present the annual report of the Audit and Risk Committee. The committee has fully discharged its charter responsibilities and very pleased you've already seen a clean audit report for the financials and the performance statement and a very clean management letter as well from the auditors, so congratulations to the Finance Department who've done very well. The report outlines the assurance model on page 79 that the committee uses to look at all the different aspects of Council's operation, internal control systems, the risk management operation, legislative compliance, internal and external audits, and also core compliance, which looks at the internal control systems across Council. All the findings from those various operations go onto a register and they're tracked to completion. We make sure that any system improvements that are found wanting are put in place and they're certainly managed to completion. So it's been a busy year and there's been findings in all the reports that we've seen, but there's been action underway to correct those issues. And I'm happy to respond to any questions.
thank you, Ms Lanyon. Does anyone have any questions? What options are available to councillors in terms of having access to the Audit and Risk Committee?
Well, certainly the minutes and the papers are available to councillors if they wish to see them, and we're always happy to have guests at the meeting. If you wish to enjoy an Audit and Risk Committee, you're very welcome. The Mayor and Councillor Gross are very active members of the committee and they certainly have all the information at hand if you want to talk to them, and we're certainly happy to have guests along if you're interested.
Ms Lanyon, are you able to outline where we've sadly had one down on our external members and we're in the process? Are you able to outline where we're up to on appointing?
We've been particularly lucky with the membership of our Audit and Risk Committee. We've had a risk expert and an internal audit expert. I have a local government and accounting background. Our risk expert has had to leave the committee due to other work commitments. We're in the process at the moment of recruiting. We've done, the Mayor and I and Ms Bennett's interviewing. We've done a couple of interviews and one to come tomorrow, so hopefully there will be a recommendation to come back to you shortly to enable us to fill that missing position.
Thank you.
Perhaps I might just say too that the member that has left us, Karen O'Brien, has done very good service over the length of time that she was with the committee, a very knowledgeable risk expert, and we will certainly miss her skill.
We will indeed. Just out of curiosity, in terms of VAGO, in terms of what we think that they might be looking at coming up in the next year, is there any intelligence around that you might like to share?
I can't remember the exact program, but they certainly, the Victorian Auditor General's Office publish a 3-year program of where their audits are going, and we certainly consider that as part of the process that we go through. We have a workshop to consider what internal audits we should be conducting. We look at the business environment of Council, look at any change, look at what's happening in risk and assurance, and also other influences like the Auditor General or IBAC, So picking up those sorts of issues, taking account of that as we do that. So we've got those core programs, and as part of our own program, we'll look at particular issues that we might pick up from that.
And one further question from me, since no one else is asking any questions. So that's how we sort of frame the internal audit program for the 12 months. How does the external audit program get decided and programmed?
We don't have a lot of control over that. The Victorian Auditor General is our formal auditor, and we deal with his agent. In the current year, it's Mark Peters from Man Judd. So it's appointed by the auditors, and he has a set audit routine of issues. So he will come to the audit committee, present a scope of works, which is governed by the Auditor General, and then come back, talk about findings, any issues that require system changes at management level. But we don't have overall control of what the auditor looks at. It looks at a program of works from the Auditor General.
And I did say it was my last question, but I've got one more. So the primary role, or one of the primary roles of the Audit and Risk Committee is to really give certainty and to counsel us here about how our organisation is operating, how that we're confident that it's being run properly, if you like. So can I ask a fairly frank question in terms of how the officers, the staff, respond to recommendations and requests for changes and extra things to do?
Certainly. We've had PricewaterhouseCoopers as our internal auditors for the last 4 years. 3 years anyway. And they have a very good relationship with management. There's always discussion around their findings and then working through the appropriate management response. I think, if anything, the staff are a bit over-enthusiastic with their timing of issues, and we're continually saying to them that we really want you to stage the issues that are coming to you. If it involves work on a computer system or detailed analysis, you need to just put appropriate stages in. We might have an interim fix before there's a final solution. But there's very good relationships between the staff and the auditors, and certainly glowing comments from the external auditors around your finance team, which is a very well considered.
Thank you. Councillors, if there are no other questions, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a move of that? Councillor Gross and Councillor Copsey. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
I would like to just say a few things. I mean, this is a very demanding committee. As I've said before, the papers are voluminous, the issues are complex and often difficult, but it is an area where I think our external people have been fantastic, and it is the moment when our officers really take the opportunity to shine. I've been really impressed with their candour, with their willingness to embrace change and suggestion, and yes, and they pass muster with our external appointees. Typically what we might do in this committee is have a look at strategic risks and internal audit, and we usually get a general update report on that. We also have dealings with our external auditor, Man Judd, and inevitably that has led to approval, and as has been noted, recommended that the annual accounts and a performance statement are ready for adoption by the Council in principle. We look at assurance, we look at compliance monitoring, financial monitoring, and a number of other supplementary reports. So the Audit and Risk Committee is something that I think I've learned a lot from. It's very demanding to be on, and it's well led, and the contribution by the CEO and officers has been really very impressive. So I commend this report to you.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Copsey? No? Would anyone else? Councillor Baxter?
Look, I do want to thank the Audit Committee for the Audit and Risk Committee for the work that they do, and apologise that I didn't have any pointed, searing questions to ask necessarily, but I can certainly see from the reporting here that that the committee has a really good handle on how our organisation works and an understanding of the risk environment that we're operating in, and that gives me a lot of confidence in the committee. It's very sad to hear that your key risk person has moved on and that we'll need to replace that. But I've no doubt that that some really high calibre person will come in and work with you. So this is all really what Councillor Gross likes to call, perhaps sometimes boring but very important work. And I don't know that I always find it boring. In fact, I find some of this stuff quite interesting. But it's vital to good governance, and I'm very happy to see how well we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? I'll also thank you, Ms Langan, for coming in and for being the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. It's a big job, and you do it so well and make it look so easy. And I have every confidence, in the committee and the thorough work that we do in terms of identifying what the audit universe is, and then picking out the key areas within the next 12 months that, we really need to focus on. We've got huge agendas, as Councillor Gross has said, but they're only once every 3 months, so, it's not too bad. We do have a significant audit regime and assurance program, and I'd just like to thank Councillor Gross for, being my council partner on the Audit and Committee. But it is the most important committee, in my view, that we have on council. So I have, I would also like to see somehow that us as councillors have more direct interaction going forward with the Audit and Risk Committee, one, so we can learn and have a bit more insight. While we have great reports, they are still quite high level and don't get into that nitty-gritty, which of course we don't want to give to the community, because then, perhaps the reports that we get at the Audit and Risk Committee will be a bit more closed, and we want that to be open and as transparent as possible. So, if somehow we can move that a bit forward and see how we can get more interaction with us as a councillor group, so that we can, all of us, have every confidence rather than just in a couple of us, I think that would be very welcomed. So thank you for your time. Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
No, thank you.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we move to 14.3, the South Melbourne Market Charter. Councillors, we don't have any members of the public here. Do you have any questions of the officers in relation to this charter? Councillor Simic?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a few questions, and they just relate to the changes that have been proposed. For the sake of clarity, and at 4.10.1, a far more extensive and strategic focus for the committee with clear roles and responsibilities is one of the changes that's been made. Can officers outline what some of those changes are that fall under that? Under 4.10.2, a revised and smaller membership of the committee. Again, can we just set out what the changes are? And 4.10.3, changes to the way the South Melbourne Market Management interacts with the committee and the City of Port Phillip. Again, if we can just set out clearly what that is without having to look at the two attachments and comparing.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So with respect to the proposed changes to duties and functions, that's outlined on page 92 in section 7 of the proposed charter. Really, it was about giving greater definition or granularity around what the council may wish, or the policy objectives it would seek to set, and the role for the committee. So it's a far more extensive list of requirements, but still gives scope for an independent committee, or mostly independent committee with a particular skill set in this area to really take that and implement it in a way that they see fit. With respect to the changes or proposed changes to membership, currently, as I understand it, there certainly are 3 councillor representatives, and as I understand it, up to 5 independent members, albeit not all of those positions are filled at this point in time. And one of the representatives on the committee is actually a senior officer, so myself, is on the current committee. Under this proposal, we would seek to reduce the number of members on the committee, so there would be 2 councillors rather than 3 proposed through this model, and then 3 candidates who would be persons independent of council, and council would seek them to have a certain expertise or skills base to be considered as members on the board. Importantly, the senior officer role would no longer be a member on the committee. That person would certainly observe the committee and provide advice, but wouldn't be a member. While there isn't a conflict in the legal sense of the term of a senior officer being on a committee and also being an employee of the City of Port Phillip and having management responsibilities, I think that under the proposed structure it would be much clearer, and certainly with the changes to the reporting lines, I think it would be clearer if the senior officer wasn't part of that group, because the senior officer will need to provide independent advice to the council. With respect to the proposed changes to reporting line, at the moment the structure as it stands is that the market manager reports to the senior officer and takes instruction from the senior officer on a whole range of activities, including the performance of the market, but is also required to serve the committee, so it could be described as having 2 line managers. Under this proposal, it's about being very clear that for all market operations, the market manager would report to the committee, who would be appointed by council because of their expertise in running general produce markets or the like, and the officer would report through to the senior officer within council because of the employment relationship that the City of Port Phillip would continue to have under this proposal, with the staff member or the staff reporting to the South Melbourne market being employees of the council rather than the committee. At a high level, they're probably the sort of 3 key changes.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Along the same lines, 4.11 also states that the committee, that the instrument of delegation has been revised. Would you be able to outline what some of the changes are?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so the instrument of delegation reflects the proposed duties, functions and powers that are outlined in the Charter. It's about providing greater granularity around what Council's expectations of such a committee would be. So the instrument of delegation reflects the Charter.
Any further questions? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Simic to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Ms Bennett. And I also note that the manager of the South Melbourne Markets is here tonight as well, and thank you for your attendance and work in preparing this report and recommended changes. As one of the three councillors, along with Councillor Voss and Councillor Bond, who's served on the South Melbourne Market Management Committee, I certainly welcome the proposed changes. I believe that they take into consideration the broad-ranging feedback that we received from all of the stakeholders which were consulted on this process, and that they small changes, but changes that significantly, I believe, will significantly improve the operations of the South Melbourne Market Management Committee. I note also that there was quite a bit of work done assessing the different options for us to move forward, and I agree with the officer's recommendation that on balance strengthening the Section 86 committee is the best way to progress. I'll also use this opportunity to outline the important achievements of the South Melbourne market over recent time, and that from an environmental point of view and from a community leadership point of view, but also from being an absolutely excellent market which is growing in attendance and also growing in opportunity and options for our community, that it is really an exemplary market and one that will only improve as a result of the changes that have been proposed tonight. So I thank the officers for the recommendations and endorse them tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Bond? No? Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So now we'll move to item 14.4, alteration to the 2018 Council meeting cycle. There are no members of the public, I think, that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Crawford?
The question is in regards to a possible amendment that we... Oh, that's why I'm reading, but don't worry, ignore me.
Any other questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Bond to move. Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak? Councillor Brand? Would you like to speak?
Yes, I do. I just think it's a very good idea that we've done this, and I think it's important that we make our decisions as far outside the political cycle as possible when we're actually refocusing on what we need as a council together. And I think it's a unifying move that we've decided to do this.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, councillors, we have number 15, which is notices of motion, and we don't have any notices of motion tonight. Item 16, reports by councillor delegates. Do we have any reports? Councillor Crawford.
So I'd like to give some feedback as the council representative on the Gasworks board. So the Melbourne Fringe Festival just wrapped up at Gasworks Park, and there were over 3,000 audience members that attended 84 performances across the 3-week period, and using the galleries and the performance spaces. So there was everything from circus and comedy and drama and spoken word. The winner of the last year's Gasworks Circus Showdown has just won the award for Best Emerging Circus Performer at the Fringe Festival. So that's really exciting that Gasworks is particularly supportive of circus arts. So that's very exciting. There's also a large group of 150 Sudanese children coming, or they would have gone today, to Gasworks Parks to see one of the kids' shows, Trash Test Dummies, and that was supported by the Gasworks Foundation, so there's some great work happening in the community. And the sculpture exhibition from nature starts coming up soon, the 3rd to the 11th of November.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Baxter.
Yes, just in my capacity as Councillor Delegate on the Friends of Sawai Committee, I just want to let people know about an event that's coming up. I'm still just bringing it up, sorry, of basically the coordinator, the director of the Covalima Community Centre in Sawai that we work with and help provide resources to Alberto Barros, that will be joining us at St Kilda Library, and I'm just trying to find the actual date of it, at 6:30 p.m. on the 11th of October, to talk about some of the work that they're doing in Sawai, and I think there's going to be some. Hopefully some really fascinating insights that come out of that.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Anything else? Anyone else with reports for their committee work? Not tonight? Okay. So I'll move on to item 17, which is urgent business, and Council as the CEO has one item of urgent business which is confidential, which relates to a development proposal. And so I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Crawford to second. And I'll now put the motion to go into confidential. So now I'm going to close the meeting due to confidentiality. I'll now call on a councillor to move the meeting be closed to the members of the public to consider this confidential urgent item of business. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Bond to second, so that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with Section 89(2)(e) of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider a confidential urgent business item relating to a development proposal. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.